March 3, 1943, the Bismarck Sea, off the coast of Papua New Guinea. Dawn breaks over waters that stretch endlessly toward horizons where war has redefined every mile of ocean. Japanese naval officers aboard the light cruiser Katori study their charts one final time, pencil marks tracing the convoy's route to Leh. In their hands rest coded messages from Rabaul headquarters promising that this supply run will strengthen their crumbling defenses. 8 ships carry 6,900 troops and vital ammunition toward what commanders believe will be a routine reinforcement mission. The convoy maintains radio silence, its destroyers scanning empty skies. Meanwhile, 50 miles away, American B-25 Mitchell bombers are already airborne, their crews practicing a revolutionary technique called skip bombing. Japanese captains expect to face conventional high-altitude attacks, easily evaded by swift maneuvers. They do not know that Allied intelligence has tracked their every movement, or that within hours they will have exactly 50 seconds to react before bombs skip across the water like stones and strike their hulls below the waterline. The strategic situation in the Southwest Pacific had reached a critical juncture by early 1943. Japan's once dominant naval position was deteriorating under relentless Allied pressure, though few recognized how quickly the balance would shift. General Douglas MacArthur's forces were methodically advancing through New Guinea, while Admiral Chester Nimitz's Pacific Fleet maintained pressure across the Central Pacific. The Japanese High Command understood that their ability to reinforce isolated garrisons was becoming increasingly precarious. At Imperial Navy headquarters in Rabaul, staff officers calculated tonnage requirements and escort strengths with mathematical precision. Their convoy would consist of 8 vessels: the light cruiser Katori, destroyers Uranami, Shikinami, Arashio, and Tokitsukaze, plus 3 converted Army transports and 1 cargo vessel. Each transport carried approximately 950 soldiers from the 51st Infantry Division, along with artillery pieces, ammunition, and medical supplies desperately needed at Leh. The convoy's combined displacement exceeded 25,000 tons, making it one of the largest Japanese reinforcement efforts since Guadalcanal. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized speed and surprise for convoy operations. Ships would maintain 18-knot cruising speed, relying on fighter cover from Rabaul-based Zeros for the first 200 miles. Beyond that range, anti-aircraft guns and evasive maneuvers would provide protection against Allied bombers. This strategy had worked successfully during previous operations, when American attacks came from high altitude and could be detected miles away. Intelligence reports suggested that Allied air strength in the region remained manageable, with most heavy bombers stationed too far away to pose immediate threats. What Japanese planners did not anticipate was the radical transformation occurring within Allied tactical doctrine. The 5th Air Force, under General George Kenney's command, had been experimenting with low-level attack methods throughout late 1942. Skip bombing emerged from these trials as a potentially devastating anti-shipping technique, though it had never been tested against a major convoy in combat conditions. The convoy departed Rabaul before dawn on March 2, 1943, maintaining strict radio silence as prescribed by operational security protocols. Captain Tamechi Hara, commanding the destroyer Shiger in a separate operation, later described the prevailing mood among Japanese naval officers during this period as cautiously optimistic. Despite mounting losses elsewhere, the Navy retained confidence in its ability to execute complex operations when properly planned and supported. Weather conditions favored the Japanese departure. Low-hanging clouds provided natural concealment from aerial reconnaissance, while moderate seas allowed the heavily loaded transports to maintain formation speed. The convoy's route would take it through the Dampier Strait, then southeast toward Leh, following a path that Japanese navigators had used successfully on previous occasions. Total transit time was estimated at 36 hours, with arrival scheduled for late afternoon on March 3rd. Allied intelligence networks had been tracking Japanese shipping movements for weeks prior to the convoy's departure. Ultra intercepts revealed not only the convoy's composition and destination, but also its approximate timing. This intelligence windfall resulted from sustained cryptographic efforts that Japanese commanders never suspected had compromised their communication security. Lieutenant Colonel Donald Hall, serving with the Allied Intelligence Bureau, later noted that the quality of intercepted information exceeded anything previously available. For planning anti-shipping operations, the psychological dimension of convoy operations weighed heavily on both sides. Japanese soldiers aboard the transports understood they were entering increasingly dangerous waters, but military discipline and cultural conditioning suppressed open expressions of concern. Many wrote final letters to families following traditions established during earlier Pacific campaigns. Allied air crews, conversely, approached the impending mission with a mixture of professional determination and awareness that they were about to test unproven tactics under combat conditions. The outcome would validate either Japanese confidence in traditional naval defense methods or Allied innovation in aerial warfare. Allied preparation for intercepting the Japanese convoy began 48 hours before the ships left Rabaul. At Port Moresby, airfield operations accelerated as ground crews prepared B-25 Mitchell bombers for their most ambitious mission yet attempted. The aircraft underwent modifications specifically designed for skip bombing operations, including removal of unnecessary equipment to reduce weight and installation of additional forward-firing machine guns to suppress anti-aircraft fire during low-level approaches. Major Paul "Pappy" Gunn, the innovative engineer responsible for many B-25 modifications, supervised final preparations personally. His team had developed skip bombing techniques through extensive testing over the previous 6 months, determining optimal release altitudes, approach speeds, and fusing delays. The technique required bombers to fly at extremely low altitudes, typically 50 feet above water, while approaching targets at speeds exceeding 250 miles per hour. Bombs would be released approximately 300 yards from target vessels, skipping across the surface like stones before striking hulls with tremendous force. Weather reconnaissance flights confirmed that conditions over the Bismarck Sea would be suitable for low-level operations on March 3rd. Cloud cover would provide concealment during the approach phase, while moderate winds would not significantly affect bomb trajectories. Allied meteorologists predicted that visibility would improve by mid-morning, allowing precise target identification without compromising operational security. The human element proved crucial in pre-mission preparations. Bomber crews understood they were pioneering a new form of warfare, but this knowledge brought both excitement and apprehension. Captain Robert Searle, commanding a B-25 squadron, conducted final briefings emphasizing the importance of maintaining formation discipline during the attack. Each pilot had practiced skip bombing techniques repeatedly, yet none had faced the combined challenges of enemy anti-aircraft fire, evasive maneuvers by target vessels, and the psychological pressure of combat conditions. Intelligence estimates suggested the Japanese convoy would be within range of Allied bombers by 800 hours on March 3rd. The timing would allow a coordinated attack involving multiple squadrons, maximizing the probability of inflicting decisive damage before Japanese fighters could respond effectively. As night fell on March 2nd, both sides remained committed to courses of action that would collide dramatically in the morning hours ahead. The first indication of impending contact came at 7:55 hours when Lieutenant Donald Thompson, piloting a B-25 reconnaissance aircraft, spotted smoke on the horizon. His radio transmission, 8 ships bearing 290 degrees, distance 15 miles, electrified Allied command centers and began the countdown to combat. Thompson's aircraft maintained visual contact while remaining outside the range of Japanese anti-aircraft guns, providing continuous updates on convoy speed, heading, and formation. Aboard the Katori, lookouts reported distant aircraft at 08:03 hours. Captain Yoshimura ordered the convoy to increase speed and begin evasive maneuvers, following standard procedures for evading aerial reconnaissance. Japanese anti-aircraft crews manned their stations, checking ammunition supplies and adjusting gun elevations for high-altitude defense. The convoy's formation tightened, with destroyers moving to provide overlapping fields of fire for protecting the vulnerable transports. The psychological tension aboard Japanese vessels was palpable. Soldiers who had endured the grinding attrition of jungle warfare recognized that they now faced a different type of danger, one against which their individual training and experience offered little protection. Many sought comfort in routine activities, cleaning weapons, writing in personal diaries, or engaging in quiet conversations with fellow passengers. The ship's crew maintained professional composure while internally acknowledging that their anti-aircraft defenses had never been tested against a determined low-level attack. Allied bomber formations approached from multiple directions, implementing a coordinated assault plan developed through months of tactical experimentation. The lead squadron, commanded by Major Ed Larner, would attack from the northwest, while Captain Bob Strickland's group approached from the south. This multi-axis attack was designed to overwhelm Japanese defensive coordination and prevent effective evasive maneuvers by the convoy. At 0817 hours, the first B-25s dropped to attack altitude, skimming the ocean surface at 50 feet while accelerating to maximum speed. Japanese observers initially mistook the approaching aircraft for conventional torpedo bombers, expecting attacks against the ship's sides rather than their hulls. This tactical misunderstanding would prove fatal, as anti-aircraft guns were positioned and aimed for high-altitude defense rather than sea-level threats. The stage was set for a collision between traditional naval doctrine and revolutionary aerial tactics. The first bomb struck at 0821 hours with devastating precision. Captain Searle's B-25 released 4 500-pound bombs at the destroyer Shikanami, watching them skip across the water before disappearing beneath the ship's hull. The explosions that followed lifted the destroyer's bow completely out of the water, revealing the catastrophic damage inflicted below the waterline. Within 90 seconds, Shikanami was listing heavily to port, her hull fractured beyond any possibility of damage control. The revolutionary nature of skip bombing became apparent immediately. Unlike conventional bombing attacks that struck decks and superstructures, these weapons penetrated ships' hulls at or below the waterline, causing massive flooding that overwhelmed pumping systems. The delayed action fuses allowed bombs to pass through hull plating before detonating internally, creating explosion effects similar to naval mines or torpedoes. Japanese damage control parties, trained for surface fires and deck penetrations, found themselves helpless against catastrophic flooding in multiple compartments simultaneously. Aboard the transport Kyokusei Maru, chaos erupted as skip bombs tore through the engine room and cargo holds. The ship's manifest listed 950 soldiers, along with artillery ammunition and medical supplies, valued at over 2 million yen. Within minutes, this investment in Japan's defensive capabilities was disappearing beneath the Bismarck. Sea survivors later recalled the horrifying speed with which their vessel transformed from a functioning transport into a sinking wreck. With insufficient time for organized evacuation procedures, the human cost mounted rapidly as additional B-25s pressed their attacks. The transport Teiyo Maru took direct hits from Captain Strickland's formation, suffering immediate power loss and uncontrollable flooding. Soldiers trapped in lower compartments had no escape routes as seawater rushed through multiple hull breaches. The ship's crew attempted to launch lifeboats, but the vessel's rapid listing made this impossible in most cases. Japanese anti-aircraft fire intensified as gunners adjusted to the unexpected low-level attacks. However, the B-25's approach speed and the skip bombing technique's brief exposure time limited opportunities for effective defensive fire. Allied pilots reported that most Japanese shells exploded harmlessly behind their aircraft, indicating that gun crews were calculating incorrect lead angles for the high-speed, low-altitude attacks. The technological and tactical advantages clearly favored the attackers, despite Japanese numerical superiority in defensive weapons. By 0825 hours, the convoy's formation had completely disintegrated. Ships maneuvered independently, seeking to escape the devastating air attacks through radical course changes and maximum speed. The destroyer Arashio, attempting to provide anti-aircraft support for the transports, found herself under direct attack from Major Larner's B-25s. 4 bombs skipped beneath her hull near the forward magazine, creating explosions that literally broke the vessel in half. The mathematical precision of Allied intelligence became evident as additional bomber formations arrived exactly on schedule. Each wave of attacks had been timed to prevent Japanese recovery between assaults, maintaining constant pressure on the increasingly desperate convoy. Radio intercepts revealed Japanese attempts to coordinate rescue operations, but these efforts were systematically disrupted by continued bombing attacks against any vessel that approached the battle area. Captain Yoshimura, commanding the Katori, faced an impossible tactical situation. His cruiser's 14-centimeter guns were useless against low-flying bombers, while the ship's anti-aircraft armament proved inadequate for the volume of attacking aircraft. At 28 hours, he transmitted a final radio message to Rabaul. Under heavy air attack, all transports sinking, require immediate assistance. This transmission would be the last coherent communication. From the convoy, the transport Ayo Maru became the 4th vessel to suffer fatal damage when Captain Ralph DeLoach's B-25 scored direct hits. Along the ship's port side, the combined effect of multiple skip bomb detonations created a hull breach extending over 100 feet in length. No damage control system could address destruction on this scale, and the transport began its final plunge within minutes of being struck. Allied losses remained minimal throughout the engagement. 2 B-25s sustained minor damage from anti-aircraft fire, but both aircraft returned safely to base. This extraordinary loss ratio, 8 Japanese ships destroyed versus 0, Allied aircraft lost, demonstrated the overwhelming tactical superiority achieved through innovative weapons employment and superior intelligence preparation. The skip bombing technique had transformed aerial warfare against naval targets, rendering traditional defensive measures obsolete. Japanese naval doctrine, developed through decades of experience, proved helpless against a new form of warfare that attacked ships' most vulnerable areas while minimizing exposure to defensive fire. The destroyer Tokitsukaze made a desperate attempt to escape the slaughter by turning northeast toward Rabaul at maximum speed. Her captain, realizing that the convoy's mission had failed catastrophically, sought to preserve at least one vessel from complete destruction. However, Allied coordination proved relentless. Captain Bill Benn's B-25 formation intercepted the fleeing destroyer at 0832 hours, approaching from her starboard quarter where anti-aircraft coverage was weakest. The Tokitsukaze's engineering crew responded heroically to demands for maximum power, pushing the ship's machinery beyond safe operating limits in a futile attempt to outrun the pursuing bombers. Steam pressure reached dangerous levels as boiler crews fed maximum fuel to the furnaces, creating clouds of black smoke that marked the destroyer's position for miles. Despite achieving speeds exceeding 30 knots, the vessel could not escape aircraft capable of 280 miles per hour. Skip bombs struck the Tokitsukaze amidships, penetrating her hull near the machinery spaces. The resulting explosions severed steam lines and fractured the main propeller shaft, bringing the destroyer to a complete stop within minutes. Without power for pumps or electrical systems, damage control became impossible. The crew's training and dedication proved insufficient against weapons designed specifically to defeat their defensive capabilities. The final transport, Nojima Maru, suffered perhaps the most tragic fate. Loaded with medical supplies and personnel from the 51st Infantry Division's field hospital, the ship carried wounded soldiers being evacuated from previous operations alongside fresh troops heading to reinforce Leh. When Captain Joe Moore's B-25s attacked at 0835 hours, the resulting explosions ignited medical oxygen supplies and pharmaceutical stores, creating fires that spread rapidly throughout the vessel. Survivors from various ships found themselves scattered across miles of ocean, clinging to debris or life rafts, while Allied aircraft continued circling overhead. The water temperature, though tropical, presented serious survival challenges for men wearing heavy military equipment. Many soldiers, trained for jungle warfare, lacked experience with maritime emergencies and struggled to remain afloat while awaiting rescue that might never come. The human cost of technological innovation became starkly apparent as rescue operations began. Japanese seaplanes from Rabaul arrived within hours, but their limited capacity could retrieve only a fraction of the survivors. Nearly 3,000 men had sailed from Rabaul. Fewer than 800 would return alive. The final phase of the battle demonstrated Allied thoroughness in exploiting their tactical breakthrough. As Japanese ships burned and sank throughout the morning hours, additional B-25 formations arrived to ensure complete destruction of the convoy. Any vessel showing signs of remaining afloat received additional attention until it disappeared beneath the surface. This systematic approach reflected Allied determination to maximize the strategic impact of their innovation. Allied photographic reconnaissance aircraft circled the battle area, recording the destruction for intelligence analysis and historical documentation. These images would later provide crucial evidence for evaluating skip bombing effectiveness and planning future operations. The photographs showed debris fields extending over several miles, with oil slicks and wreckage marking the locations where proud warships had fought their final battles. Japanese submarine I-17, operating northeast of the battle area, received desperate radio transmissions from convoy survivors, but arrived too late to affect the outcome. The submarine's captain, Commander Yoshitaka Takeuchi, surfaced briefly to assess the situation before submerging again to avoid Allied air patrols. His periscope observations confirmed the complete destruction of the convoy, leaving only scattered survivors and floating debris across the Bismarck Sea. The technological implications extended beyond immediate tactical success. Skip bombing had proven that innovative weapons employment could overcome significant numerical disadvantages in defensive armament. 8 Japanese ships mounting dozens of anti-aircraft guns and carrying nearly 3,000 military personnel had been destroyed by fewer than 40 Allied bombers without losing a single aircraft. This achievement ratio would influence Pacific theater strategy for the remainder of the war. Radio monitoring stations throughout the Pacific detected the silence that followed the convoy's destruction. Japanese naval communications, previously reporting position updates and operational status, simply ceased. Allied intelligence analysts noted the abrupt termination of all transmissions from the convoy's call signs, confirming the completeness of their victory. The Bismarck Sea had become a graveyard for Japanese naval power and a proving ground for revolutionary aerial tactics that would reshape maritime warfare permanently. The morning's events demonstrated that technological innovation, combined with superior intelligence and coordination, could achieve decisive results that traditional numerical calculations had suggested were impossible. The strategic ramifications of the Bismarck Sea disaster became apparent within hours of the battle's conclusion. At Rabaul, Admiral Junichi Kusaka received fragmentary reports that gradually revealed the magnitude of the catastrophe. Initial communications suggested heavy losses, but the complete silence from all convoy units indicated total annihilation. This realization forced an immediate reassessment of Japan's ability to maintain operations in the Southwest Pacific. The mathematical implications proved devastating for Japanese logistics planners. The convoy had represented nearly 1/4 of Japan's available transport capacity in the Southwest Pacific. Its destruction eliminated 6,900 combat troops, equivalent to an entire infantry regiment, along with irreplaceable equipment and supplies. More critically, the loss demonstrated that conventional convoy operations had become suicidal against evolved Allied air power, forcing a fundamental revision of reinforcement strategies. Japanese industrial capacity could not rapidly replace the destroyed vessels. By March 1943, shipyard production was already failing to match losses, and the Bismarck Sea disaster accelerated this negative trend. Each transport sunk represented months of construction effort and thousands of tons of steel that Japan's constrained economy could ill afford to lose. The strategic initiative was shifting decisively toward the Allies, who possessed overwhelming advantages in both production capacity and technological innovation. Allied intelligence analysis revealed the broader implications almost immediately. Ultra-intercepts of Japanese communications showed panic and confusion throughout the Southwest Pacific Command structure. Plans for reinforcing New Guinea were abandoned, while defensive preparations shifted toward previously secure rear areas. The psychological impact extended far beyond the material losses, as Japanese commanders lost confidence in their ability to maintain offensive operations. The human dimension of strategic collapse became evident through intercepted personal communications. Japanese officers requested transfers to other theaters, while morale reports indicated widespread demoralization among units previously considered elite. The innovative nature of skip bombing had created fear of technological obsolescence that affected Japanese planning at all levels. Traditional naval tactics, refined through generations of experience, appeared suddenly worthless against opponents who could rewrite the rules of warfare through applied innovation. Within 48 hours of the battle, its consequences rippled throughout the Pacific theater with unprecedented speed. General MacArthur's headquarters recognized that Japanese defensive capabilities had been fundamentally compromised, accelerating plans for advancing through New Guinea. The successful demonstration of skip-bombing tactics provided Allied forces with a decisive advantage in future amphibious operations, where Japanese naval interference had previously posed significant threats. The technological revelation transformed Allied tactical doctrine permanently. Air forces throughout the Pacific began intensive training in skip-bombing techniques, while ground crews modified additional B-25s for low-level anti-shipping operations. The technique's effectiveness against heavily defended targets suggested applications far beyond the immediate Pacific theater, influencing strategic planning in both the European and Asian theaters. Japanese responses revealed the depth of their strategic predicament. Emergency conferences in Tokyo acknowledged that traditional naval doctrine required complete revision, but Japan lacked the resources and time necessary for fundamental tactical evolution. The country's limited research and development capabilities, already strained by wartime demands, could not match Allied innovation rates. Each technological breakthrough widened the gap between Japanese capabilities and Allied potential. Statistical analysis provided stark evidence of shifting strategic balance. Allied aircraft production in March 1943 exceeded 7,500 units, while Japanese production remained below 2,000. This production differential, combined with superior pilot training and technological innovation, created compounding advantages that Japanese industry could not overcome. The Bismarck Sea demonstrated how manufacturing capacity translated directly into battlefield superiority when combined with innovative tactical employment. The human cost extended beyond immediate casualties to encompass long-term strategic paralysis. Japanese commanders, recognizing their inability to protect large convoys, resorted to small-scale supply operations that could not meet operational requirements. Troops throughout the Southwest Pacific faced gradual starvation and ammunition shortages as the supply system collapsed under Allied pressure. The innovative weapons that had destroyed the convoy would soon interdict virtually all Japanese shipping within range of Allied airfields at international. Observers noted the battle's implications for global strategy. German naval attachés reported that Allied technological capabilities exceeded previous estimates, while neutral nations recognized the inevitability of Japanese defeat given such overwhelming material and innovative disadvantages. The Bismarck Sea had demonstrated that modern warfare rewarded adaptability and production capacity over traditional military virtues. The final strategic implications became clear as Allied forces exploited their breakthrough throughout the remainder of 1943. Skip bombing techniques, perfected through combat experience at Bismarck Sea, destroyed over 200 Japanese vessels during the subsequent 6 months. This sustained campaign eliminated Japan's ability to reinforce isolated garrisons, creating a strategic collapse that accelerated Allied advances throughout the Pacific. Japanese attempts to counter skip bombing proved futile, given their limited resources and technological base. Experimental modifications to anti-aircraft systems consumed valuable materials while providing marginal defensive improvements. The fundamental problem: ships, designed for surface warfare facing weapons, optimized for underwater attack, required complete vessel redesign that Japan's bosom shipbuilding industry could not accomplish within wartime constraints. The EB psychological transformation proved equally decisive. Allied pilots, emboldened by their technological superiority, pressed attacks with unprecedented aggressiveness, while Japanese naval personnel developed fatalistic attitudes that undermined combat effectiveness. The innovation cycle favored forces with superior research capabilities and industrial depth, creating compounding advantages that traditional military training could not overcome. Economic analysis revealed the mathematical impossibility of Japanese victory, given Allied production advantages. The United States produced more military aircraft in single months than Japan manufactured throughout entire years. When combined with superior pilot training, advanced tactics, and innovative weapons employment, these numerical advantages created overwhelming superiority that Japanese strategy could not address through conventional means. The Bismarck Sea battle's lessons influenced post-war military doctrine development, establishing principles for innovative weapons employment that remained relevant decades later. The combination of technological innovation, superior intelligence, and coordinated tactical execution became a model for achieving decisive results against numerically superior opponents. The battle demonstrated that modern warfare rewarded adaptability and industrial capacity over traditional military virtues, fundamentally altering strategic thinking throughout the military establishments of all major powers. Future conflicts would reflect these lessons, emphasizing technological development and innovative tactics as primary determinants of military success in an increasingly complex and rapidly evolving strategic environment. The long-term consequences of the Bismarck Sea engagement extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory, reshaping the entire Pacific War's trajectory and establishing precedents for modern naval warfare. Allied intelligence analysis confirmed that Japanese strategic planning had fundamentally collapsed following the convoy's destruction, with enemy forces shifting to purely defensive postures throughout the Southwest Pacific. This strategic paralysis accelerated Allied advances and shortened the war's duration significantly. Industrial production statistics revealed the mathematical foundation of Allied victory. American factories delivered over 16,000 B-25 Mitchell bombers during 1943, while Japan produced fewer than 5,000 aircraft of all types. This production differential, combined with superior pilot training and innovative tactics, created compounding advantages that grew exponentially throughout the conflict. The skip bombing technique's development exemplified how democratic societies could rapidly innovate under pressure, adapting existing technologies to create revolutionary capabilities. Stories emerged from the battle's aftermath that illustrated both its tragic cost and historical significance. Survivor accounts from Japanese veterans describe the psychological impact of facing weapons that rendered their training and experience obsolete overnight. Allied aircrew memoirs emphasized the satisfaction of pioneering tactics that proved decisive in shortening the war, potentially saving thousands of lives through accelerated victory. The technological legacy influenced military doctrine development for decades following the war's conclusion. Skip bombing principles informed smart weapon development during the Cold War, while the battle's emphasis on intelligence coordination and innovative tactics became standard elements of modern military planning. Educational institutions incorporated the engagement into curricula as an example of how technological innovation could achieve decisive, strategic results. International recognition of the battle's significance grew over time as historians analyzed its broader implications. Military academies worldwide studied the engagement as a classic example of successfully combining technological innovation with superior logistics and intelligence coordination. The battle demonstrated that modern warfare rewarded adaptability and production capacity over traditional military virtues, lessons that remained relevant throughout subsequent conflicts involving technological disparities between opposing forces. The final assessment of the Bismarck Sea engagement reveals its position as a pivotal moment in both the Pacific War and the broader evolution of military technology. The battle's innovations influenced naval warfare development throughout the remainder of the 20th century, establishing principles for precision weapons employment that became fundamental elements of modern military doctrine. Allied success demonstrated how democratic societies could rapidly adapt to strategic challenges through technological innovation and superior resource mobilization. Survivor testimonies from both sides emphasized the battle's human dimension beyond its strategic and technological significance. Japanese veterans recalled the helplessness of facing weapons that their defensive training could not counter, while Allied aircrew described the satisfaction of successfully employing innovative tactics that proved decisive. These personal accounts preserved the memory of individual courage and sacrifice that characterized all participants in the engagement. Historical analysis confirmed that the Bismarck Sea battle marked a fundamental transition in Pacific theater dynamics, establishing Allied technological and tactical superiority that would persist throughout the war's remainder. The engagement's lessons influenced military planning far beyond its immediate context, contributing to doctrinal developments that shaped Cold War strategy and modern precision warfare concepts. The battle's legacy extends beyond military history to encompass broader themes of innovation, adaptation, and the relationship between technological capability and strategic success. Educational institutions continue studying the engagement as an example of how superior logistics, intelligence coordination, and innovative thinking can overcome significant numerical disadvantages. The Bismarck Sea demonstrates that modern warfare rewards societies capable of rapid adaptation and technological innovation. Today, the waters of the Bismarck Sea remain peaceful, marked only by occasional memorial visits and historical research expeditions. The battle's participants have passed into history, but their legacy endures through the tactical innovations they pioneered and the strategic principles they established. Their sacrifice and achievement remind future generations that freedom's defense requires both technological excellence and the courage to employ new capabilities decisively when civilization faces existential threats. The waters of the Bismarck Sea are calm now, but beneath them lies a graveyard that once marked the breaking point of Japan's ambitions in the Southwest Pacific. What happened on that March morning in 1943 was not simply the loss of 8 ships and thousands of men. It was the collapse of a belief system, a revelation that the rules of naval warfare had been rewritten in less than a minute. For the Japanese captains on the bridges of their doomed ships, 50 seconds separated confidence from catastrophe, order from chaos, and life from death. The battle has since been dissected in terms of tactics, intelligence, and strategy. But at its heart, it remains a story of transformation. How the tide of war turned not through brute strength alone, but through innovation, daring, and the relentless pressure of industrial might. For Japan, the convoy was meant to symbolize resilience. The men who boarded those transports in Rabaul carried not just rifles and ammunition, but also the promise that Leh could still be held, that the crumbling defensive line in New Guinea might yet be reinforced. They were disciplined soldiers, trained to obey and to endure, and their commanders trusted in the doctrine that had carried the Imperial Navy across the Pacific in the early months of the war. Their faith lay in speed, radio silence, and the umbrella of anti-aircraft guns that bristled from their escorts. But doctrine is only as strong as the conditions that sustain it, and by 1943, the conditions had changed beyond recognition. Allied intelligence had stripped away secrecy, American factories had erased scarcity, and the skies above New Guinea now belonged to an air force eager to test its new methods in blood. Skip bombing was more than a tactic. It was the manifestation of a broader truth that the United States and its allies could adapt faster than their enemies, absorbing lessons, improvising solutions, and transforming ideas into weapons at a pace the Axis powers could not match. When Paul "Pappy" Gunn and his engineers modified the B-25s, they were not merely tinkering with machinery. They were reshaping the relationship between air and sea, finding a way to make relatively small aircraft do the work once reserved for heavy torpedo bombers or entire surface fleets. The Japanese captains expected high-altitude raids they could dodge with practiced maneuvers. What they received instead were bombs that bounced across the waves like stones thrown by a child, only to tear through steel hulls and ignite the cargo holds below the waterline. Against that kind of ingenuity, experience counted for nothing. In those first minutes of the attack, panic mixed with disbelief. Survivors later recalled how the sea itself seemed to turn against them as explosions erupted just beneath the surface, lifting ships out of the water before breaking their backs. Damage control teams rushed to their stations, but they were trained to fight fires on deck or patch holes above the waterline. Nothing in their manuals or exercises had prepared them for bombs exploding deep inside their ships, rupturing bulkheads and flooding compartments in seconds. Men drowned before they could climb ladders. Transports capsized before lifeboats could be lowered. The enemy was not only invisible until the last possible moment, but also faster, deadlier, and merciless in pressing the attack. For the Americans, the battle was vindication. Pilots who had practiced endlessly at low altitude, learning to skim waves with engines screaming and nerves stretched to breaking, now saw the theory unfold with devastating clarity. Bombs struck home, ships burned, and entire regiments vanished beneath the waves. There was satisfaction in proving that innovation could defeat tradition, that a handful of modified bombers could destroy what had once been the pride of a naval empire. Yet there was also a haunting awareness among the air crews of what they had unleashed. Through their gun sights, they saw men leaping into oily water, clinging to wreckage, waving frantically as flames closed in around them. The victory was overwhelming, but it was also deeply human in its cost. War rewarded ingenuity, but it measured that reward in bodies. Strategically, the destruction of the convoy was far greater than the sum of its parts. 6,900 troops, artillery, and supplies, meant for lay were gone, erased in a single morning. Japan had lost nearly a quarter of its available transport tonnage in the theater, a blow that could not be made good by its overstretched shipyards. More devastating still was the psychological collapse that followed. Japanese officers realized that large-scale convoys could no longer survive under Allied air dominance. From that day forward, their reinforcements would have to trickle in on barges or submarines too small to alter the course of battles and too vulnerable to sustain momentum. The Bismarck Sea did not just sink ships. It sank the very idea that Japan could hold New Guinea or project power into the southern Pacific. On the Allied side, the lessons were immediate and intoxicating. Skip bombing became a standard method, spreading to squadrons across the Pacific and even influencing doctrine in the European theater. The photographs taken of the wreckage, blackened hulks, spreading oil slicks, survivors adrift, circulated through intelligence reports and training manuals, proof that innovation could turn the tide of war. To commanders like MacArthur, it was confirmation that his strategy of cutting off Japanese garrisons rather than storming them head-on was not only possible, but inevitable. To the men in Washington and Melbourne, it was evidence that America's industrial and inventive capacity was achieving exactly what they had promised: overwhelming superiority through creativity and mass production. Yet beneath these statistics and strategic assessments lay the quieter truths of human memory. Japanese survivors who reached the shores of New Guinea carried scars both physical and psychological. Many spoke in later years of the terror of watching entire ships vanish in minutes, of comrades trapped below decks, of the helplessness that comes when training and courage mean nothing against a weapon you cannot counter. For the Americans, too, the victory carried a weight. Pilots returned to base, exhilarated, But when the adrenaline faded, some admitted to sleepless nights haunted by the sight of men in the water, tiny figures waving as they circled back for another pass. War had demanded ruthlessness, and they had delivered it, but memory does not always yield to orders. In retrospect, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea can be seen as a microcosm of the wider war. Japan, bound by tradition, stretched thin by limited resources, and increasingly reactive, could not match the adaptive, resource-rich enemy that constantly reinvented its methods. America, with its factories, engineers, and willingness to experiment, embodied the future of warfare, fast-moving, technologically driven, and unrelenting. The 50 seconds that Japanese captains had to react before the bombs struck became a metaphor for their nation's dwindling time. Just as their ships could not escape the new tactics, so too their empire could not escape the industrial storm that was bearing down upon it. Today, divers exploring the wrecks of the Bismarck Sea find twisted steel and silent cargo holds where once soldiers stood ready for battle. Coral grows over gun barrels, and fish swim through shattered hulls. The sea has reclaimed what war left behind, transforming destruction into a strange kind of peace. For historians, the site remains a symbol of innovation's power in conflict. For descendants of those who perished, it is a grave marked not by stone, but by waves. The story endures because it captures more than a tactical success. It captures the essence of how wars are truly won and lost, not by clinging to yesterday's doctrine, but by daring to create tomorrow's. The epilogue of the Bismarck Sea is not written only in history books, but in the legacy of modern warfare. Precision strikes, guided weapons, and the belief that intelligence and technology can compensate for numbers all trace their lineage back to those low-flying B-25s and the crews who believed in an untested idea. The world changed in those waters because men were willing to risk everything on a new way of fighting. For the Japanese captains who had only 50 seconds, that change came too late. For the Allies, it was the beginning of the end for an enemy that could no longer keep pace. And for the future, it was a reminder etched in steel and salt water that adaptation is the ultimate weapon, and that in war, as in life, time is often the most precious resource of all. What is your perspective on this part of history? Share your thoughts in the comments, because every memory and reflection helps keep the past alive.